so many comments on my last video are asking what builds I'm using in the Incursion run. Well, there were two, and this is the first. I will be releasing the second one shortly after, but check this out. The Oxidizer is arguably the strongest skill in the game. There are so many scenarios in which this skill has proven its merit, from the casual fun styles of play all the way to the highest levels of difficulty. Well, have you ever wanted a build that can collectively melt the lovebirds as fast as any DPS composition out there, or completely neutralize legendary groups of enemies with ease? The purpose of this build is to 1. Help provide the community with an alternative strategy to completing the Incursion, while providing a build which utilizes a skill that is clearly on a higher echelon from amongst the others in its category. Yes, the Oxidizer is that good. And to make things even more insane, in this video I will break down two build styles, one specific to the Incursion and the other being legendary certified. So if you're interested in builds from DPS all the way to skill, then don't hesitate to like the video and subscribe to my channel for some dedicated Division 2 content. Now let's get into this. Alright fam, we're here. And welcome to the infamous build that everybody wanted to see. Some people didn't want to see it, but I think it's necessary to show this to the community because it's important to have build diversity, and I'm really proud that I was able to get a group together in order to run the Incursion with all skill builds, hybrids, or however you want to call it. The fact is that it works, and I believe that it's a very effective way to run the Incursion. That being said, let me just start with this build, and it's only right that I start with the specialization, and that's Technician. And one of the main reasons why is because it's perfect for skill builds and hybrids. It gives you an extra skill tier, but one of the main reasons, since this is an Oxidizer specific build, is that on the skill tree for Technician, there's something that allows you to deal extra damage to robotics and skill proxies, specifically skill proxies. And you could really see the difference when fighting against mini tanks and whatever else is considered a skill proxy. But in this regard, Johnson's heal box that drops on the ground is pretty much non-existent when these Oxidizers are on the ground dealing damage to them. I didn't even see it actually. That's how fast the damage was dealt. But the idea is to use the Oxidizer to permeate the area, and the Oxidizer releases canisters of corrosive gas that damage enemy armor, skill proxies, and causes damage over time. So if you use this in combination, you're doubling down on that damage, which is insane. Alright, now I actually believe that this is the most effective way to defeat Johnson and Martinez. There's never a time where you're not dealing damage. You don't have to reload, you don't have to use sledgehammer, you don't have to even use opportunistic, you don't have to use any of that. And Johnson and Martinez pretty much give you the kill. They run up there after you kill the kid, and they sit there waiting for you to kill them. So if you didn't see my last video, I suggest you go watch that to see my analysis, because it's insane. And that's because of how much damage is being dealt all at the same time. And this is something that I found out that I never knew before. Shout out to Rousey and Solus, also IKEA, man. There's some goons in the speedrunning department. And we were able to run through this Incursion relatively easily once we figured it out. And you know, if you want to run this, I don't suggest that you go in there randomly matchmake. This is something that you need to have a team that's actually competent and understands how to play high level content. So this is not something you just go in willy-nilly and expect to just go in and go crazy. As with any high level content, it requires skill. It has a high skill gap, and so you have to respect that. But anyways, the chatterbox is something you're not using for damage. You could use the capacitor because the capacitor scales with skill tiers, which is what we were using in the other build. And you can use this, but you just won't get the damage as fast as we were with the Oxidizer chems being spammed on the ground. Now I'm going to try this again without the chatterbox to see if it's even needed. But the idea is to reload and retain the incessant chatter talent, which is when you reload, rate of fire increases by 20% for each enemy within 15 meters. So after we kill the kid, Martinez throws her shock trap. I don't know how many of those traps are on the ground, but each one of those traps count as an enemy, and they are all within 15 meters of you, I'm pretty sure. And you can get the max stacks, which is 5. This increases your rate of fire by 100%. After you reload, which you saw in the video, you switch to your Oxidizer and you retain this incessant chatter buff for your skill. This allows you to spam your Oxidizers faster than you have ever seen. So the idea was to first get incessant chatter. Then, once the Oxidizer is on the ground, we switch to 𝐸𝐴𝐳 to apply damage to the bosses while getting Force Multiplier's talent, which is perfectly combined arms. Shooting an enemy increases your total skill damage by 30%, plus 𝐸𝐴𝐳, which increases your damage even more of your skills and weapon by 15%. So this pretty much doubles your damage of the Oxidizer clouds that are on the ground. Let me explain to you how crazy this is, because we weren't even able to do these steps. We weren't even able to get to this point, because by the time we were done dropping the Oxidizer clouds on the ground, Johnson and Martinez were already pretty much dead. Okay, not to mention the fact that we're using the Artificer Hive, which increases your damage and your buffs by 70%. So this periodically drops charges into your skill, whatever's in your hand, right? So that's strategy. So the strategy's out the way. Okay, the build I have are 2-piece Hannah Yu, skill haste and skill damage, the ultimate hybrid skill brand set. It's perfect to use, and if you have force multipliers, even better. Okay, you want to roll skill damage, skill haste with skill haste mods. You want to get as much skill damage and skill efficiency as you can on this build. You can run it with 3 pieces of Empress International if you like, but you won't be able to have the versatility. Now, the reason I'm using the Fox's Prayer and Contractor's Gloves with damage to target, side of cover, and damage to armor is because the Oxidizer is the only skill in the game that those bonuses apply to, which is crazy. This whole time I thought that your drone, your turret would at least give you damage to armor, but it doesn't. So if you have a build that's utilizing the drone and turret, the only thing that these 2 pieces of gear are helping is your weapon damage, because this applies to your Oxidizer or whatever else you're using. But when you have these rolled with skill damage, it's going to apply to the Oxidizer. So not only does the Oxidizer deal damage to armor, but this damage to armor multiplicative bonus is applied as well. Now, I don't know if the capacitor's damage to armor does, but I'll have to test that out. So the rest of the build is the sacrifice. The chest piece gives you perfect glass cannon, 30% amplified damage to your skills and weapon, but you take 60%. Like I said, this incursion requires a high skill gap. So if you're not comfortable with this, then just try playing around with it to see if you can get used to this playstyle. Because in general, high level content, you can't take damage anyway. It doesn't matter what build you use, unless you're using some type of insane Foundry Bulwark immortal build where it doesn't matter what damage you take. But in stuff like this, you have to be shifty, you gotta be in cover, you gotta be in and out of cover. You just have to be a pretty skilled player in order to have a playstyle like this. Granted, this build is not a build that we were using in the whole incursion, I'm going to show you, but we were using glass cannon. That's a hint. If you want to also add more insult to injury, you could use Perfect Spike, which gives you 25% skill damage for 15 seconds for performing a headshot. Now, this you can do right after you drop the Oxidizer clouds on the ground. You can do that, but you know, you don't need it. You don't even need it. I'm actually thinking maybe you don't even have to run up to there. You know how we ran up there and all stood up there? That was wasting time, actually. You could probably get the overcharge. By the way, the healer overcharged the chem launcher, the Oxidizers, before we were able to, before we permeated everything. But you could just stand out in the courtyard while Johnson and Martinez run up there and oxidize the balcony, because you know this permeates through walls. So I'm going to try it that way, and I'm going to try it without the chatterbox to see if we even need that rate of fire buff. But the final piece on this build is the Murakami holster. The first piece gives you 20% skill duration, which is great because this allows the clouds to be on the ground for 20% longer, which is something that's definitely needed, I think. Skill damage and skill haste are the ideal rolls, just like everything else on the build. Now, of course, the hardest piece you're probably going to have finding is the sacrifice with skill damage, skill haste, but you don't have to use the sacrifice. You can use another chest piece like Wyvern with glass cannon. So this build has some different ways that you can run it, but ultimately this is the way you want to go. Okay, but that's the build, folks. Now let me show you the version that I was using for legendary. All right, here it is. Okay, now this one I was having a lot of fun with. Okay, the same specialization, technician, but this is geared for legendary missions, and I'm actually thinking about making a build. I'm making a build right now that is pretty crazy, because now that I've beat the Incursion with a skill build, with all skill builds, the opportunity to try it with other versions is welcome. So I have an idea to do it with the status effect build that's pretty insane. But anyway, that's something else. Here's the build that's specifically for legendary missions. Shooting enemies build stacks to a cap of 40. Each stack grants 1.5 skill damage, which is a total of 60 when it's maxed, and then you get 7.5% weapon damage for each skill tier gained. It's a no-brainer to use this. I've always been into skill builds and hybrids, but I think it's about time for me to expertise this all the way to level 20. So I think that'll be my next goal, to try and get my builds min-maxed. I just don't really have a lot of time to do it, but I'm pretty hype about what's going on right now, so I think that I'm going to start that journey. Okay. Now, we already went over what technician specialization does specifically for the Oxidizer. I'm using the same skill composition that I did in other build, and it's slightly different here because I'm still using the Fox's Prayer and Contractor's Gloves for obvious reasons, but the difference is the 𝐜𝐡𝐳𝐫𝐞 bag and this Fenris chest piece. Okay, 10% assault rifle damage for the capacitor, skill haste and skill damage. This is the perfect chest piece. And I have tag team. Now, I think that tag team was specifically made for the Oxidizer and skills that pretty much linger, because it's crazy. With this, you don't even really need skill haste, right? So the way that this works is that the last enemy you have damaged with the skill is marked. Dealing weapon damage to that enemy consumes the mark to reduce active cooldowns by 6 seconds. And this has a 4-second cooldown. So every 4 seconds, you'll be reducing the cooldowns by 6 seconds. Now, the other build that I was talking about that I made is here right now, but I'm not going to show you. I was using, instead of the Artificer Hive, the Fire Sticky Bomb. Now, the cooldown was 21 seconds, and when I hit an enemy with that, I had so much status effects rolled onto it that the burn lingered for a long time, and while it was lingering, the tag team logo would appear on their body, indicating that when I shoot them, the skill cools down by 6 seconds. And this applies to whatever's on cooldown. So, like, you don't want to use this with anything like a drone or a turret, anything that's out for a long time. You want to use this with things that you use once and it has a high cooldown. Like, for example, if you use a shrapnel trap, which is normally like a minute cooldown. Every time you use the Oxidizer lingers around the ground. So this is what the NPCs do, right? You shoot this Oxidizer on the ground, they leave cover and they come back like idiots. When they come back, tag team applies. So you'll be getting your charges back in no time. And this essentially makes tag team a damaged talent, which is really not. It just allows you to get your skills back faster to apply more damage more often. So I'm using a 𝐜𝐴𝐤 mask for the skill haste, and I don't have a 2-piece, but that's fine. I probably have a holster here somewhere. 𝐜𝐴𝐤, yeah, I got a holster somewhere that's pretty good, maybe in my stash. But the second piece of 𝐜𝐴𝐤 gives you skill damage, but it's okay because the 1-piece Wyvern gives you skill damage. So if you have this composition, you're good. Okay, skill haste and skill damage if you can. But like I said, the skill haste doesn't really matter as much since you have tag team. Now this is what I was talking about in the thumbnail, for overcharge every 45 seconds. Now I didn't really test this, I just kind of thought that it was that way. You let me know in the comments if this is right or not, because every time you toss a grenade, it gives you another one, it refunds it, and it grants 1 skill tier. So it gives you overcharge if you're at skill tier 6 already. And this has a 60-second cooldown, and I was saying that because this lasts for 15 seconds. So does the cooldown start as soon as you throw the grenade? So I'm not sure of that distinction. I have to test it out, but you can let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate it. This is a great backpack, and since this is a build geared exactly towards the Oxidizer, it's perfect for this build. Because as you know, in the Incursion, we were using overcharged Oxidizers on the ground. So this is how I start fights in legendaries, and you can clear battlefields, you can clear helicopters, all of that. This is insane, man. Along with the damage you get from the capacitor, it's the perfect relationship. So that's pretty much it for this build. There's not really much to show on the stats in regards to crit, or let me just show you to see if there is something that we can see. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, if you're using a shotgun, the damage to targets out of cover and damage to armor, when you have this in your hand while the Oxidizer is on the ground, or you shoot the Oxidizer, this applies to your skills as well. There's so many ways to build damage, it's crazy, man. But that'll do it for this video. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. I've been having a blast these past few days. I'm just really happy that I was able to do the incursion that way. It opens up for so many possibilities. I just think that so many people are very dismissive, and they just dismiss so many things without even testing them against each other, because you think that something is so strong when looking at it. Like the Ouroboros shreds, and it's hard to think of anything that can compete with that at all, right? But when you put things side to side and put them into perspective, then you can see it and you're like, oh, okay, what else can we do, right? So that's where I'm at, and that's where I'm gonna stay. If you're feeling it, if you're feeling my style, I'd appreciate a like on the video and subscribe to my channel, join the family, join my Discord. Let's get these conversations going. Let's link up for the incursions and build a strong community as we go into Division 3 whenever it comes out. I appreciate you stopping by as always, and if you made it here, you're a GOAT, and I'd like you to comment #PurpleHaze. Anyways, that'll do it for this one, fam. I'll catch you in the next one. Be right out.